Chapter 589. The Demon King of Incarceration, 10. Explosions erupted on top of the previous ones. There weren't any gaps in Eugene's continuous barrage of attacks. In response to this assault, the Demon King of Incarceration directly opened up a new path forward. His fist blocked the stream of Levantians, scattered the empty swords, extinguished the divine flames and shattered the crystal blades. With each step he took forward, the Demon King of Incarceration's fists created multiple afterimages. But even though he had broken apart everything in front of him, the attack had yet to end. The scattered empty swords reassembled themselves, the extinguished flames reignited, and the shattered blades were fully restored. On a visual level there were already dozens of Levantians, but the actual density of the bombardment was dozens of times greater than what could be seen with the naked eye. The Demon King of Incarceration felt a chilly sensation run down his spine. Goosebumps had appeared on his arms. It had been a very long time since he had last faced an attack of this level. He was reminded of the first time that he could no longer bear the weight of his regrets and had rushed at the Demon King of Destruction. Except for those times when he had attempted to end himself by facing the Demon King of Destruction, the Demon King of Incarceration had never experienced attacks like this one. Incarceration couldn't afford to underestimate the danger he was currently in. If he had failed to react to this attack in time and were hit by it, even someone like him who had never known death would have come close to feeling what that might be like. Of course, speculation like that would only matter if he had failed to respond to the attack and was hit by it. The space they were in was a separate world that had been created through a miracle that Sienna had cast using the demon eye of fantasy, with the help of the residual thoughts of Noir Giabella. Within this miraculous world, Eugene and Sienna's holy domains had merged to become one, working together to thoroughly identify the Demon King of Incarceration as an external enemy and driving out his influence. So, within the current confines of this world, the Demon King of Incarceration was left without any of his previous advantages. But just as he was left without any advantages, he was also bare of any disadvantages. To put it simply, this meant that the situation for the Demon King was neither bad nor good. Although the Demon King of Incarceration might be seen as an invader in this altered reality he now found himself in, the Demon King's domineering strength and superior level couldn't be shaken even within the confines of this world. Eugene and his comrades were the ones who had gained an overwhelming advantage thanks to these preparations. Still, in other words, this just meant that Eugene and his comrades had finally gained the qualifications needed to confront the Demon King of Incarceration on an equal level while they were in this world. Nothing had truly changed, and the Demon King of Incarceration wasn't planning on doing anything differently. Eugene's growth during their battle may have ever so slightly adjusted how Incarceration believed things were supposed to go, but even that was ultimately just a minor disruption that wouldn't change today's outcome. Even if this entire current era had given rise to the highest number of unusual happenings in all of the eternities that the Demon King of Incarceration had lived through, nothing had truly changed about what the Demon King of Incarceration needed to do. That was why the Demon King of Incarceration kept advancing forward while destroying the dozens of Levantians. He kept breaking the blades that were restored again and again each time he destroyed them, and with his hands he snuffed out all of the divine flames that kept reigniting around him. Eugene couldn't help but feel an eerie discomfort at this sight. Within this holy domain that was created from a connection between dreams and reality, none of the advantages of this dream could be enjoyed by the Demon King of Incarceration. In the past, Noir Giabella had neutralized a similar bombardment of Levantians by simply ending the dream and recreating a new dream instead of trying to challenge their power directly. The Demon King of Incarceration might not be able to use such a method, but even so, who could have expected that Incarceration would recklessly choose to make a frontal breakthrough? Moreover, even as the Demon King of Incarceration continued his advance, destroying Levantians with each step, he showed no signs of being in a rush. The Demon King of Incarceration could calmly repel all of the incoming attacks as he slowly closed the distance between himself and Eugene. "I've seen through your moves." The Demon King of Incarceration's muttered words pierced through the aftershocks of the repeated explosions. As he said this, the Demon King of Incarceration shifted his stance. He twisted his body to the side and lifted his left hand into the air. Then he tightly clenched his right fist and pulled it back to his waist. The Demon King's widely splayed left hand was stretched forward. Something seemed to explode with a poing sound. Under Incarceration's fine yet firm control, Strands of dark power extended from his fingertips and fluttered through the cracks left by the explosions like a spider web. This web of dark power then split into thousands, even tens of thousands, of tiny strands that entered between the fragments of the Levianians as the blades were being shattered into pieces. Finally, the Demon King of Incarceration simply clenched his left hand. The thin strands of spider web instantly thickened into chains. Countless fragments and burning embers were all individually bound within these chains. The Demon King of Incarceration pulled back with his left hand. At this pull, the tens of thousands of chains all came flying back to him as if it was only natural for them to do so. Then the Demon King of Incarceration slowly leaned backward. The right fist held at his waist tilted back along with the rest of his body until it was low enough to almost touch the ground. All these movements seemed to be playing out in infinite slowness to Eugene's eyes. Within this world where dreams and reality overlapped, the Demon King of Incarceration gave off a distinct sense of alienation. Soon Eugene realized what his instincts had been trying to tell him. It wasn't truly alienation that he was sensing. It was that the Demon King of Incarceration was using his strength and dark power, the weight of his very existence itself, to invade and conquer their holy domain through a frontal assault. Just like how the laws of their holy domain had been altered by the power of fantasy, the Demon King of Incarceration was altering reality once more through the force of his presence alone. Boom! The loud sound came from the Demon King clenching his fist. Eugene instinctively took a step back. But before his feet could move as far back as they wanted to, the Demon King of Incarceration thrust his fist forward. Boom boom boom. As his fist pushed forward, its advance was accompanied by a sequence of loud roars. Soon the Demon King's fist had been extended to its full length. All Levantians that had been arrested in the chains were instantly annihilated, and the divine flames that had been burning as fiercely as an inferno were fully extinguished. The Demon King laughed softly as he lowered his left hand. As for the fist he had thrown with all his might behind it, the hand collapsed into black ash. The power that the Demon King of Incarceration had sealed away within his inner abyss was a double-edged sword that would even cut into the Demon King himself. But it wasn't a big problem for Incarceration. No matter how sharp this double-edged sword might be, it wasn't sharp enough to take the life of the Demon King of Incarceration. But would it have been enough to take your lives? The Demon King wondered. Chains erupted from the stump of the arm that had collapsed into ash. These chains twisted around each other before forming back into a new arm. Fiubnov.co. Eugene could never have imagined that it would even be possible to crush his strongest attack through a frontal clash like the one that the Demon King of Incarceration had orchestrated just now. However, his confusion and shock were short-lived. Once again Eugene pulled his mind back into gear. His ability to read the flow of power is terrifying, Eugene thought to himself. The Demon King had previously declared that he had seen through Eugene's attack. It seemed that his words hadn't been a bluff. Even as he was smashing apart all of the attacks with his fist during his advance, the Demon King of Incarceration had simultaneously been reading and calculating the flow of each of the attacks. Although Eugene hadn't established any specific patterns during his barrage of Levantians, the Demon King had still been able to instantly see through each random attack as it came. Eugene had never once thought that he would fall behind his opponent when it came to his instinct for battle, but now it seemed that he was left with no choice but to admit his relative inferiority. The Demon King of Incarceration was truly a monster beyond all known limits. At first he had been a hero, then he had become a Demon King in order to thwart destruction. And now he was a greater Demon King who had been alive for many eons and had seen the end of many worlds in his time. So even after Eugene and his comrades were done stacking the board with so many advantages, it felt like they were still only barely managing to pull out equal. In that case, just how much more can your miracle take? Eugene asked Sienna and Noir telepathically. Sienna's face paled at the idea that Eugene had conveyed along with his question, and Noir burst into laughter. Oh my God, Hamel, are you seriously considering that? Noir asked in disbelief. Are you insane? Sienna questioned harshly. In response to these reactions, Eugene just grabbed his chest with one hand. Fwoosh. Flames spouted from Eugene's fingertips, engulfing his chest. Eugene then turned to look at Molen, who was standing right next to him. Molen had an unusually stiff expression on his face but smiled when his eyes met Eugene's. Is there any way for us to overcome this challenge without trying something crazy? Eugene asked. Battles against the Demon Kings have always been like that, Molan agreed. Eugene's lips twisted in response. Boom boom boom. Having erased the inferno blocking his way forward, the Demon King was steadily approaching once more. The saints, connected to Eugene's thoughts, didn't even consider trying to block his approach. They could also sense the danger that he posed. The bombardment of Levantians that they had just launched against the Demon King of Incarceration hadn't been able to inflict any serious damage. Until now, the only effective way of causing any damage to the Demon King of Incarceration had proven to be a continuous, unrelenting assault. Since they had managed to figure out that much, they had to change the nature of their attacks to match. I've said this before, Hamel, but just because this is a dream, that doesn't mean everything is possible. If a dream becomes too extreme, then it will inevitably be affected by reality. It's already happening now, in fact, Noir reminded him. If that is truly the course of action you have decided on, then I will do my best to make the dream you desire come true, no matter how demanding of a miracle it requires. However, I'm honestly a bit afraid. Is something like this really possible? Sienna asked in a trembling voice. Eugene just smirked as he tightened his grip on his chest and said, by this point, it's useless to ask whether or not it's possible. Even if it did prove impossible, they would still have to try it. If they gave up their attempt and sought to avoid this clash, they wouldn't be able to defeat this monster, the greater Demon King, in front of them. So Eugene quickly took action without waiting for any further response from Sienna and Noir. His fingers dug into his chest, tightening around his heart. At the same time, he reached out for his followers' beliefs. This belief was what formed their faith, and their faith was what created miracles. And miracles could become whatever their god desired. Eugene's divine power flared up like a bonfire. This was ignition. They were still far from the deciding point of the battle. Eugene had no intention of forcing things to that point. But the current ignition that he was using was one that was free of any time limits. This was thanks to Sienna's miracle, which altered reality by using the power of fantasy. As the universe within Eugene was suffused with divine power, there was a violent eruption. This eruption didn't just end with the first explosion. One after another, explosions erupted continuously as the universe began to expand infinitely. Eugene's body was trembling from the force. Just like how the Demon King of Incarceration's fist hadn't been able to withstand his full power and had fallen away into ash, Eugene's body also seemed unable to endure the powerful explosions erupting inside him. His skin had begun to crack open. The cracks spread down his chest, which began to swell and shrink as if it was on the verge of bursting open. However, his body didn't break apart. The saints, who were still fused with Eugene, kept up their steady stream of prayers even as a fever, so hot that it felt like their souls were burning, ravaged their shared body. The widespread cracks slowly began to seal back together. Eugene's body was gradually adjusting to the immense power unleashed by the eruptions. It wasn't just the saints and Eugene who had to endure this pressure. As Eugene's greatest warrior and incarnation, Molan also had to bear part of the burden of these insane explosions. Blood began to flow from between Molan's tightly clenched teeth as he almost fell to his knees. Aha! Aha aha! Moore burst into laughter like a mad woman. The demon eye of fantasy, which was pouring out streams of light, was shaking so fiercely it seemed like it was about to fall into pieces. Sienna also had to let out a groan as she barely managed to hold onto the rapidly vibrating Mary. Even with their resonance, Sienna and Noir were struggling to keep the miracle active. But without such power, it would be impossible for them to defeat the Demon King of Incarceration. The Demon King of Incarceration halted his stride mid-approach. The power currently being built up in front of him was so impressive that he couldn't help but stop and take a moment to just observe it. How impressive, the Demon King said, his voice filled with sincerity. In the Demon King of Incarceration's eyes, this wasn't just a simple mass of power. If his mission to preserve life despite having witnessed the destruction of the world several times over could be described as a kind of madness, the massive power that was currently standing in his way was madness based on a desire for termination rather than preservation. It was a madness that sought to burn everything they had in their possession in order to illuminate the world. As he saw this, the Demon King of Incarceration also came to a realization that made him smile. As if to combat the light in front of him, dark power engulfed his whole body. Just like how shadows grew darker the more intense the light that created them, the Demon King of Incarceration's very existence currently seemed to have grown more distinct than it was before. Clink clink. As the Demon King of Incarceration began to move once more, the sound of the chains he wore wherever he went accompanied him. The Demon King stepped forward. Eugene also raised his bowed head to meet him. Aah! Molen kicked off the ground with a loud roar. The blade of the axe that he was holding in his hands had shattered. A radiantly burning flame now stood in place of the axe blade. Whoosh! The axe swung through the air, leaving behind a trail of light. The Demon King of Incarceration just held up his left fist to block the path of the axe. The flash of light that erupted when the two forces met left the whole world shaking. The outer edges of Babel, which had also sunken into this space between fantasy and reality, collapsed from the aftershocks. Instead of pulling back the arm that had been sent flying from the recoil of the collision, the Demon King of Incarceration twisted his body to the side. A chain was wrapped around his right arm, his right hand also having been clenched into a fist. This chain wasn't meant to defend against his opponent's attack. It was meant to prevent his own arm from being damaged by the force of his own attack. Boom. As he met the Demon King's next blow head-on, the entire left half of Molen's body shattered as he was pushed backward. As Molen staggered backward from the recoil, Eugene leaped over his head. The divine sword, which was held high in Eugene's hands, was covered in flames. The flames bellowed outwards, creating dozens of small suns. These newly created eclipses then rained down like meteors. The Demon King of Incarceration simply waved both his hands in front of him. In a single instant he had read and redirected the flow of the eclipses. So, the explosions that should have struck the Demon King of Incarceration failed to make any contact and were diverted elsewhere. Eugene wasn't flustered by this. He was still in the air, holding the divine sword. Blood was already beginning to flow from both Eugene's eyes and lips. Instead of using his power to create dozens more Levantians like before, Eugene had concentrated all of that power into his divine sword. And this was after having overlaid multiple uses of ignition. Power that was almost too excessive even for a dream fell from Eugene's hands. The plunging divine sword pierced through the Demon King of Incarceration. The Demon King of Incarceration fell to his knees. The countless chains wrapped around the Demon King's body had provided a slight impediment to the path of Eugene's divine sword. But even so, the remaining power behind the blow was extremely heavy. Even as blood burst out from the Demon King of Incarceration's lips, he struggled to raise his head. The Demon King's blood-soaked lips were twisted into a smile. High above the divine sword, the previously scattered suns had gathered together once more. At some point Sienna had also flown up into the sky. The galaxy that was spreading out behind her back was being materialized into reality. Meanwhile, Noir, who now looked like an angel, had erupted into peals of laughter that were far from angelic. Boom boom boom. The dozens of suns shrank in on themselves before exploding into hundreds of thousands of smaller stars. It looked as if the night sky was pouring down onto the ground below. All the stars that had once illuminated that dark canvas were now crashing down directly onto the Demon King of Incarceration. The Demon King quickly realized that this wasn't something that he could overcome by meeting it head-on. The Demon King's sharp senses, which had previously allowed him to see through all kinds of chaotic flows of power, were unable to find a way to break free of this offensive. The Demon King's hand grabbed hold of several thousands of his chains. He then swung all these chains like whips, shattering apart a slice of these falling stars. He then leaped through the small opening that this had created. Of course, Eugene and Molen weren't just going to watch as the Demon King of Incarceration fled. Holding an axe in each hand, Molen began swinging his weapons in a crazy flurry. The falling stars shattered as they met his axes, and all these fragments were shot out at the Demon King of Incarceration. All the measures they had taken were meant to restrict the Demon King of Incarceration's movements. Meanwhile, all of the possible measures that the Demon King of Incarceration might use to overcome this situation were flashing through Eugene's head. The Demon King of Incarceration wasn't the only one who could see through his opponent and calculate their next move. As predicted, Eugene had truly grown over the course of this battle. And now, by fueling his ignition with so many explosions that he had been about to kill himself, Eugene had broken through all of his previous limits and had unleashed his full potential. Before the Demon King of Incarceration could make another move, Eugene preemptively burst into action. As the Demon King was about to use his fist and his swinging chains to open up another path of escape, Eugene arrived to block that path from forming. His divine sword appeared in front of the chains before they could even strike. When the Demon King of Incarceration instead tried to use his fist to intercept the hero, Eugene had already managed to slice the chains into pieces, freeing his divine sword. Eugene then dove into the Demon King's reach. His hand was thrust toward the Demon King of Incarceration's chest. At this moment, the Demon King of Incarceration couldn't see any way to escape this blow and couldn't think of any possible means to defend himself. This was because anything that he could come up with would be blocked by Eugene. Boom. The power transferred through Eugene's palm drilled into the Demon King of Incarceration's chest. Dark red blood poured out from between the Demon King's lips as something burst within him. The attacks continued unabated. A fist that Eugene swung with all his might behind it spun the Demon King's head to the side. Molin's was slammed into the staggering Demon King's waist. But even when part of his waist was chopped in half, the Demon King refused to collapse. Instead, finding a spare moment in between the continuous waves of attacks, the Demon King of Incarceration found a way to turn the tables once more. Chains leaped out from the Demon King's shadow, wrapped around Molin's limbs and tore them off. Instead of dodging the divine sword, which had closed in on him while he was distracted, the Demon King of Incarceration just bared his neck towards the blade. When the divine sword was swung into his neck, he took advantage of the close distance to slam his elbow into Eugene's chest. As this impact forced Eugene to let go of the divine sword and fall backward, the Demon King was also sent rolling across the ground. But he had been sent rolling. That was what was important to Eugene. This greater Demon King, who had seemed like he would never be brought down, had been sent rolling across the ground, unable to control his body. Just a little bit more, Eugene told himself. Swallowing the blood that had surged up his throat, Eugene charged forward. Chapter 590. The Demon King of Incarceration, 11. As he was rolling across the floor, the hand of the Demon King of Incarceration dug a furrow in the ground. This made for quite the inelegant sight, but the Demon King of Incarceration didn't feel any sense of embarrassment. Right now, the only thing he was feeling was praise for his foes who had managed to push him to such an extent. How impressive, Incarceration thought to himself. It wasn't as though the Demon King had never thought the world was without even the slightest hope of survival. But then what purpose was behind the Demon King of Incarceration's current actions? It was all to see if Agarotha's reincarnation, who had died in vain during his previous life, could return all the way to this point while single-handedly shouldering the burden of his fate as the hero. By presenting him with such an ordeal, the Demon King wanted to see Eugene's full might as a sort of test for him. And in his opinion, Eugene didn't seem to be lacking in any way. To be honest, the Demon King of Incarceration was already satisfied with what he had seen. Eugene's obsessive levels of determination and the insane focus he had shown, as well as the assault that they had launched at him with their full force. All of that had already surpassed the standards that the Demon King had previously set for them. However, just like Eugene and his comrades refused to give up on their goals, the Demon King of Incarceration had no intention of simply giving in either. He wasn't just going to roll over because he was satisfied with their strength. This was because, similar to Eugene's faith that their choice of action was the right one, the Demon King of Incarceration also believed that his choice was the only option. But is that really the case? The Demon King suddenly thought to himself. He was reminded of the Spectre. The Spectre hadn't known the whole truth of the matter, but he had been made aware of the constant cycle of destruction as well as the fact that the Demon King of Incarceration possessed the ability to cross over to the next era. Even after learning these facts, the Spectre had still made his own choice of what to do. In the end, just like how he wanted to prove his worth by dying the way he did, I am no different, the Demon King thought as a smile crossed his blood-drenched lips. This test wouldn't just end with both sides backing down after reaching a satisfactory outcome. This battle would only end after one side had managed to completely destroy the other's will. So what exactly was behind the Demon King of Incarceration's will? After repeatedly succumbing to despair and being forced to patch himself up from the rags that his attempts to commit suicide by destruction had left him in, Incarceration had settled on the solution of coexisting with destruction. Since he couldn't kill or be killed, he was left with no other choice but to coexist. He refused to allow everything to end just because he went herring off trying to kill something that couldn't even be killed. Even if that meant he had to continue reigning as a demon king for all eternity, even if he had to carry all the souls of the deceased and constantly repeat the cycle of creation and destruction while knowing that it would be all for nothing in the end, the demon king of incarceration would do what he believed was right. Who's the one truly being unreasonably greedy here? The demon king asked softly as he dug his fingers into the floor and pulled himself up. His bloodshot eyes glowed with an inner light as he continued. Aren't I the greedy one for stubbornly insisting on building up a sand castle, all while knowing that it will be swept away by the waves? Just like how the sun set and the night fell, only for the sun to rise once more, the waves of destruction were sure to follow each other no matter what. The man who had planted the seed for the birth of destruction and had been left with no other choice but to bear witness to the fruit of his mistakes had transformed himself into a demon king to save the crumbling sand castle that the world had been transformed into. No matter how many times the unceasing waves would eventually tear the sand castle down, once the waves had receded, he would build the sand castle once more with his mud-stained hands. I don't know the answer to those questions. I truly can't tell, the demon king of incarceration said with a shake of his head. However, Eugene Lionheart, I still feel that the hope you are clinging to is nothing more than stubborn foolishness. Therefore, I cannot accept your desired course of action. The demon king of destruction and Vermouth Lionheart were one being. Even if they had been temporarily separated, Vermouth's essence was still linked to destruction. This meant that it would be impossible to defeat the demon king of destruction while trying to save Vermouth. If instead Eugene and his comrades were willing to give up on Vermouth, if they only wished to kill both the demon king of destruction and Vermouth Lionheart to save the world, then the demon king of incarceration may not have felt the need to go this far. However, since Eugene had given his final word on the matter, insisting that he would accomplish the impossible, the demon king definitely couldn't allow such foolishness. That was why he had wanted to drive them into despair and force them to give up. I don't need your approval, Eugene said coldly as his divine sword rose to block the demon king's path forward. While pulling back the shreds of his fist for another punch, the demon king of incarceration burst into laughter. Eugene wasn't the only one who looked ready for a fight. Behind him stood Molin, and Sienna was floating above them. The saints were responsible for supporting them so that the three of them could focus exclusively on their fight. If I defeat you, that means I'm the one who's right, Eugene stated determinedly. Right now, it didn't matter which of their beliefs was objectively correct. To put it simply, whoever won today was in the right. Even if they couldn't overcome destruction in the end, today's loser wouldn't have any grounds to argue with the results. That was what Eugene firmly believed, and the demon king of incarceration burst into laughter once more as he agreed. That certainly seems to be the truth. Incarceration didn't think that such a mindset was selfish or self-righteous. After all, the demon king of incarceration was also the same in that he had lived his entire life without ever needing anyone else's understanding. Since each of them believed that they were in the right and insisted that theirs was the only course of action that should be taken, they had no choice but to clash with each other until one of them was ultimately forced to give in. No, the demon king suddenly thought as he clenched his fist. There was a difference between them. Eugene wasn't alone. He had his companions with him. He also had believers who were praying for his victory. Even if they didn't know the full story behind the matter, they still didn't want the current era to end. They all hoped that the hero, their god or the light, would defeat the demon kings and bring peace to the continent. But what about the demon king of incarceration? The demon folk participating in this war didn't know the first thing about the demon king of incarceration. The only things the demon folk desired were to win this war, trample the losers beneath their feet, and establish an immortal empire that would rule over the entire continent. They didn't know about destruction or the fact that even if they did win this war, their immortal empire was something they would never get to witness. They didn't know that once they were victorious, they would be annihilated by the demon king of incarceration or the demon king of destruction without even getting enough time to enjoy their victory. They didn't know they would lose all memories of this era before moving on to the next one. They didn't know that some of their souls would be harvested to become one of the countless souls trapped within the demon king of incarceration's chains before being reborn into the next era. They didn't know that a part of the souls that were not chosen would be rendered down to become the base elements of dark power, primal spirits, and the new world's mana. They didn't know that the remaining souls left after all these processes were complete would become fused together and form part of the sinister power that the demon king of incarceration had sealed deep within himself. That was how things had always been. Incarceration didn't expect anyone to understand him. He had never talked to anyone about this. He had never shared his complaints with anyone either. He had never gone to a confession. That was the way that things had been in the previous eras, and that was also how things would be in the current era. Even his close associate, Gavid Lindman, who incarceration had kept by his side for an exceedingly long span of time and who he had favored to the point where even the Demon King himself recognized that it was unusual for him, hadn't known the truth that the Demon King of Incarceration had kept to himself until the very end. "I hope that your Majesty's wishes come true." In his final moments, Gavid seemed to have formed a slight understanding of his liege. However, other than Gavid, the demon folk would never truly be able to understand the Demon King of Incarceration. "Once I am dead, please accept my soul. Please allow me to see the end of the world together with you, your Majesty." After leaving these last words while knowing that he would definitely be meeting his death today here in Babel, Balzac Ludbeth had died in a vain attempt to guard the gates. There was no way that he could have understood the end that the Demon King of Incarceration was waiting to see. All that was waiting for them was a hopeless void of despair with no means of averting it, and any who found themselves in such a situation would be bound to resent the one who had brought them to such a tragedy. Even the demon folk who had been loyal to the Demon King of Incarceration their entire lives, even the immigrants settled in Helmuth who had suckled on the welfare of the Demon King like it was their lifeblood and who had mortgaged their souls as payment for all the privileges they had received during their lifetimes, they would all resent the Demon King of Incarceration for conceding to and compromising with destruction. And the Demon King of Incarceration was willing to humbly accept all of their resentment. Boom. The world shook as Eugene moved. But the Demon King of Incarceration wasn't just staying still during this time. Suddenly, a short span of a single moment was somehow stretched out endlessly, but within the split seconds of that single moment, the Demon King of Incarceration was constantly attacking, defending, and searching for openings. But the hero and his companions were so closely linked together that there weren't any openings in their attacks. By breaking apart and scattering each of their attacks, the Demon King managed to keep his damage minimal, but their attacks were gradually growing ever more intense. Molen came charging in with his overwhelming might. With his strength amplified by his status as Eugene's incarnation and the resonance of the world also aiding Molen, the Demon King of Incarceration's very existence was shaken with each blow that Molen managed to land. Through the power of her imagination, Sienna's spells were able to materialize the impossible. She had already brought the night sky to come crashing down on the Demon King more than once. Sienna's magic had even turned this entire world into a forest, overturned the earth to transform it into a blazing hell, burned what was left into a stifling desert, and then froze everything to leave the ground covered in cold permafrost, only to repeat the cycle anew. All of these natural disasters were directed solely at the Demon King of Incarceration and weren't causing any harm to her comrades. And on top of that, Eugene's blazing suns repeatedly came crashing down on the Demon King before floating up once more. As if to prove his past identity as the god of war, the weapons in Eugene's hands kept changing. His attacks, which were so variable that it was impossible to react to them even if one stared directly at them, were slicing away at the Demon King of Incarceration. However, all of this still wasn't enough to kill Incarceration. Even a world like this couldn't fully suppress the Demon King of Incarceration's power. No matter how well made this dream world might be, it was still ultimately just a product of merging dreams with reality. It couldn't completely replace reality. Eugene and the divine power of the light that he was linked to and Sienna's divine power might be able to push the demon eye of fantasy to its very limits, but even so, this absurd world wouldn't be able to last forever. And if Incarceration really looked for it, he should be able to find a way out of this world. If he could only find the breaking point, he could break apart this world and collapse it around them. So where was the breaking point? Wasn't the answer obvious? There was no need for the Demon King of Incarceration to laboriously figure out the entire structure of this world to destroy it. After all, there was a much easier method than that. The demon eye of fantasy was responsible for starting up and maintaining this world. And the one wielding the demon eye of fantasy was Noir Giabella, who had been transformed into an angel after she had been left with only her soul. Quicklink. Chains erupted from the Demon King of Incarceration's abyss once more. Then the Demon King of Incarceration's arms lost their original form and transformed into limbs of pure dark power that rippled as they moved. At the same time, the Demon King's eyes were dyed black as if ink had been dripped into them. Incarceration's sense of reason shook as he loosened his hold on his madness. The madness that he had sealed away for him to be able to endure his long eons of life, along with all of the strength that this madness carried, was finally being released. Gurk. When Incarceration coughed instead of blood, a dark stream of poison leaked out from between his lips. Freewebnovel.com. Even for the Demon King of Incarceration, it would be dangerous to release any more of this poison. If he weren't careful, his ego would collapse and he would become an insane, rampaging disaster, no different from the Demon King of Destruction. Naturally, the Demon King of Incarceration had no desire to experience such a fall. While he might be able to continue coexisting with destruction even if he did become the same type of natural calamity, it would mean that Incarceration would no longer be able to create any future eras for this world. To think that they would be able to push me to this extent, the Demon King of Incarceration thought as his dark eyes glowed with an inner light. Eugene, Molin, and Sienna, who were still trying to push the Demon King of Incarceration just that little bit further, felt a primal fear and uneasiness strike them when they saw his eyes. It was the same feeling they had experienced when they first saw the Demon King of Destruction. "Ah," Noir gasped as she felt his poison begin to target her. Just the initial release of Incarceration's poison was causing her hold on the dream world to shake. Noir felt an agonizing pain spreading from her left eye socket as if she was being burned alive, but she still refused to close her eyes. This was because she was certain that they had finally managed to reach the turning point of the battle. If they didn't take this chance to push him just a little bit further, they wouldn't be able to seize this opportunity to finally defeat the Demon King of Incarceration. This poison wasn't just his last resort. It was also the Demon King of Incarceration's fatal weakness. "I'm all too familiar with such feelings of obsession," Noir thought to herself as she forcefully held her lips tightly clamped in a twisted smile. The Demon King of Incarceration was obsessed with ensuring the next era. He would never allow himself to completely fall to the corruption of that deadly poison. Though in the first place even that poison isn't enough to kill someone like you, Noir thought wryly. That poison might not be enough to endanger Incarceration's life, but why had he still insisted on sealing it away instead of using it? Was it because he hated the pain that it brought him? No, it couldn't be such a simple answer. The reason the Demon King of Incarceration had suppressed such a powerful poison and the signs of the madness within those ink-stained eyes pointed to the outcome that the Demon King of Incarceration absolutely refused to allow. "You don't want to lose yourself," Noir sympathized. She was very familiar with such feelings. Noir had been like that before as well. She had been afraid and disgusted by the thought of becoming someone else, someone completely different from the current her. In other words, before the Demon King of Incarceration would fully reach the point of losing himself, he would be left with no choice but to reapply his chains to that poison and return it to its incarcerated state. So even if Incarceration was a Demon King burdened with the curse of never being able to die, once all of his means had been blocked, Incarceration would be forced to admit defeat. As such, Noir couldn't allow herself to close her eyes. If she could just hold out until the Demon King of Incarceration couldn't bear it any longer and was forced to withdraw his poison, then it would be Noir's, no, Hamel's victory. "Although your victory is what I too desire, Hamel," Noir thought as bloody tears began flowing down from her demon eye of fantasy. Having realized that the darkness unleashed by the Demon King of Incarceration was far from ordinary, Eugene and Molin had once again resumed their attacks. Noir clenched her teeth while staring at Eugene's back and thinking, even if your victory demands a harsh toll from me, would they really be fine if they could just hold out until the Demon King of Incarceration was forced to withdraw his poison? There was no way that could be possible. That poison was the corpse poison distilled from the decomposition of countless dead bodies and souls as well as the deaths of multiple eras. Even when Noir was alive and reigning over Giabella City, it would have been impossible for her to hold out against such a poison for very long. So for Noir, who had died and was left with barely her soul, it became even more of an impossibility for her to hold out against the Demon King of Incarceration's poison for all that long. Noir was certain of a single fact. Before the Demon King of Incarceration would be forced to withdraw his poison, her soul would have already been thoroughly contaminated. What would happen to her once she was so contaminated? Would her soul just disappear? Or perhaps, would even her personality be contaminated to the extent that she was no longer herself? No matter what happened, It meant that she would not be able to reincarnate and reunite with Hamel. Noor burst into laughter. By this point, should she still be afraid of such an outcome? No, Noor wasn't afraid at all. Since, in the first place, Noor had never even counted on the possibility of reincarnation following the death that she had so craved. The only thing that Noor desired at this point was Hamel's victory. No matter what happened to her in the end, it didn't matter. Even if she were to completely disappear once this dream world had collapsed, Noor's only desire was to give everything she had to serve as a stepping stone for Hamel's victory. That was why Noor continued to glare back at the poison without closing her demon eye of fantasy. This dream might still collapse in the end, but until then she hoped to push the demon king of incarceration as far as possible. What's this? Eugene thought to himself with a frown. Eugene and Molen weren't able to sense the existence of the poison. They could feel that the dark liquid that the demon king of incarceration had released wasn't anything ordinary, but they didn't know it was poison. This was because Noor had completely suppressed the effects of the poison and had kept it contained to herself. However, Sienna, who was connected to Noor, was able to analyze the existence of this poison to a certain extent and was staring at Noor with an astonished look in her eyes. Noor whispered. As Noir's emotions were conveyed to her, Sienna bit down heavily on her bottom lip. She couldn't tell Noir to stop what she was doing. Noir had made up her mind to do this, and Sienna also understood that, at this point, there was no other way for them to defeat the demon king of incarceration. We just need to finish this fight before anything happens, Sienna encouraged herself. Allowing Noir's soul to be destroyed like this would go against Sienna's ideals. Because of that, Sienna wanted to defeat the demon king of incarceration as quickly as possible before Noir was erased. Meanwhile, incarceration knew that Noir would do something like this. The demon king swung the limbs of darkness that had replaced his usual arms at his foes. Sizzle. The poison scattered along the trajectory of his swings and caused the world to shake once more. But Eugene and Molen, who were protected from the poison's effects, simply sliced and smashed apart the globs of dark liquid as they charged at the demon king of incarceration. It seems that she still underestimates me, the demon king of incarceration muttered to himself with a chuckle. This poison indeed held dire consequences for the demon king of incarceration, but it would take a long time before it could even hope to destroy his ego completely. Even with Eugene, Molen, and Sienna's attacks consuming the demon king of incarceration's strength, it would still take much less time for Noir to succumb to the poison and either be destroyed and go insane than it would for the demon king to reach the limits of his endurance. Incarceration shook his head as he thought, Noor Giabella, I knew that you would be willing to go so far for Hamel's sake, but in the end your sacrifice will only. Suddenly, the demon king of incarceration's mind received a great shock. Gurk. Incarceration coughed as his blood that had been completely transmuted into the poison flowed down from his lips once more. The demon king of incarceration was confused, not understanding what strange affliction had suddenly come over him. What is this? The demon king thought in shock. Soon, the demon king of incarceration understood the true nature of this unexpected weakness. A different source of contamination from the corpse poison was eating away at the abyss contained within the demon king of incarceration. This is... Incarceration thought as the face of a particular man appeared in the demon king of incarceration's mind. Balzac Ludbeth? Chapter 591. The Demon King of Incarceration 12. The demon king of incarceration didn't know why Balzac Ludbeth's face had popped up in his mind at this moment. Could Balzac truly have been capable of this? If he were, there was no way that the demon king of incarceration wouldn't have noticed. After all, no matter how clever Balzac might have been, the Black Wizard was personally contracted to the demon king of incarceration. The demon king was able to read the minds of his contractors at any time he pleased. Of course, the demon king of incarceration had always permitted his subordinates the freedom to plot rebellion. As long as they didn't put any of their ideas into action, that is. If they did try something and failed, he would always be sure to hold them responsible for their mistakes. However, the demon king of incarceration had never once felt any desire to rebel from the human black wizard known as Balzac Ludbeth. Balzac had always shown loyalty to the demon king of incarceration, from the moment that he had arrived in Babel to the moment he died. In his final moments, Balzac expressed his admiration for Sienna's magic, and at the same time he died hoping for the victory of the demon king of incarceration. Balzac Ludbeth, the demon king of incarceration mused. He was certain of it. The Demon King of Incarceration knew that Balzac Ludbeth wasn't capable enough to be a threat to him. Balzac had also never once shown any thought of betraying the Demon King of Incarceration. Yet even so, the Demon King of Incarceration couldn't remove Balzac's name and face from his mind. Although there was no evidence for it, the Demon King of Incarceration was now sure that Balzac Ludbeth was the source of these uncomfortable and dangerous shifts taking place inside of him. That was what both his intuition and instincts were telling him, so there wasn't any need to waste time looking for evidence to support this theory. The Demon King of Incarceration sensed that whatever was currently afflicting him was a poison even deadlier than the corpse poison that had been slowly fermenting and accumulating inside of the Demon King throughout the course of his long life. Just what is this? The Demon King thought with a frown. His senses were becoming skewed. It felt like he had lost control of himself and that time was passing slowly for him, leaving him separated from the world. He was even left uncertain whether he was currently standing up or lying down. Incarceration tried to use his remaining sense of clarity to get a hold of himself somehow, but his body wasn't responding the way he wanted it to. Instead he could feel his poison levels rising. The poison spilling out from the abyss within him had slipped out of the Demon King of Incarceration's control and was currently eating away at his own dark power. This was the start of a rampage. The poison was beginning to run out of control. It shouldn't have been possible for something like this to happen. Still, the power that the Demon King of Incarceration had managed to hold in check for the entirety of his life was gradually freeing itself from his control. This is dangerous, Incarceration realized. Even the Demon King of Incarceration couldn't help but feel a sense of crisis at this moment. He had been storing up far too much poison within the depths of his internal abyss. And above all, the one thing that the Demon King of Incarceration needed to keep secure at all costs, even in the worst-case scenario, was the chain that connected him to the Demon King of Destruction. If that connection was severed or destroyed, there would be no way for the Demon King of Incarceration to cross over to the next era. The Demon King of Incarceration was the only one who felt that time seemed to flow slowly. This meant that those attacking him weren't subjected to any such inconvenience. Eugene and Molin quickly noticed that there was something strange about the Demon King of Incarceration. The Demon King, who had been able to respond to all of their previous attacks without being phased or put off balance, had suddenly stopped reacting to their attacks. At first, they thought this might be a part of some kind of trick. They suspected the Demon King might have deliberately left an opening, wanting to draw them in deep before springing the trap. However, that wasn't the case. Even after they braved the risk and ventured in deep, the Demon King of Incarceration still hadn't reacted to them. He didn't do anything to push them back, block them, or launch a counterattack. What is this bastard up to? Eugene thought to himself as he glared into the Demon King's stiff gaze. Even though Eugene was examining Incarceration from such a close distance, all that could be seen in the Demon King of Incarceration's eyes was a dim reflection of Eugene's figure. It was as if Incarceration's eyes weren't really looking at him but instead seeing something else. And that was indeed the case. The Demon King of Incarceration stood alone in the center of the abyss, his consciousness being pulled out of the normal flow of time. There he parted his lips and said, "Balzac Ludbeth." As he called out that name, the rippling, black sea below him began to bubble over as it boiled. "What are you doing here?" the Demon King of Incarceration demanded. This sea was the abyss hidden within the Demon King of Incarceration. All of his madness and the souls he had accumulated over the eons of his life were all dissolved into this sea. But the soul of Balzac, who had just died today, wasn't meant to be in here. The Demon King of Incarceration hadn't thrown Balzac's soul into this abyss. The Demon King of Incarceration frowned as he asked, "Could you be trying to usurp my power and status? If that's the case, it will be a waste of your effort, Balzac Ludbeth. I admit that the dagger you have stuck into my back has delivered quite the lethal blow, but as someone who is already deceased, you will never usurp?" A voice suddenly flowed out from within the bubbling foam. Countless souls had been dissolved within this abyss, and right now Balzac was included as one of their number. If Balzac's aim was to crawl out of that abyss and turn the tables to devour the Demon King of Incarceration's soul, thus forcefully seizing the Demon King's power and status, Balzac would never be able to succeed. "It seems that you've come to a great misunderstanding, Your Majesty. I have no desire to become a Demon King," Balzac stated. He no longer had a physical body, and Balzac wasn't strong enough to pull himself out of this abyss and create a new body for himself either. Balzac's soul had already become trapped within this vast sea. But there was something strange going on. Even though he had become a part of this vast and unfathomable sea, Balzac hadn't lost his sense of self. He, who had been alive for less than 100 years, was still able to maintain his independent ego when fused with all of these countless souls. Balzac reminded the Demon King, "Don't you already know what my greatest wish is, Your Majesty?" The bubbling foam was gradually spreading as the sea began to shake. Of course, the Demon King of Incarceration knew what Balzac's greatest wish was. Balzac wanted to become a legendary wizard. It was a wish that only a child who greatly admired magic and had just stepped on the path to becoming a wizard would have. As a black wizard sworn to the Demon King, "If I had managed to defeat Eugene Lionheart and Sienna Meridian, that would certainly be enough to be called a legend, Your Majesty." However, Balzac paused for a moment. Although Balzac had been stripped of his body, and only his voice was left flowing up from the abyssal sea, the Demon King of Incarceration could sense that Balzac's voice was filled with unconcealable joy and satisfaction. "I want to become a legend as a wizard, not a black wizard," Balzac proudly revealed. "If I am to become a legend whose story is passed down for a long time, I want my story to be told by humans, not demon folk. So you asked me if I wanted to become a Demon King? Don't you know me better than that, Your Majesty? I would hate that more than anything else." The Demon King of Incarceration knew that Balzac was telling the truth. Unlike Edmond Codrith, who had wanted to abandon his humanity to become a demon king, Balzac had never once felt the desire to lose his humanity. But despite knowing that, the Demon King of Incarceration still couldn't help but feel lost about the motivations of this human, Balzac Ludbeth. This was because the Demon King had never seen him planning any of this on the occasions when he had read Balzac's mind. Balzac smiled proudly as he said, "Just imagine it, Your Majesty." As a black wizard contracted to the Demon King, what would happen if he were to betray the Demon King at a crucial moment? What would happen if the betrayal of that black wizard managed to fatally wound the Demon King at a crucial moment, and if it was thanks to that wound that the hero and all of humanity won the battle? The Demon King of Incarceration stared at Balzac silently. "That has always been my greatest desire. But I never thought that I would ever get close to fulfilling my wish." Balzac smiled as he explained, "I still felt that way even up to my final moments. Because, while I may have made plenty of preparations while I was alive, once I was dead, there was no way for me to make any further preparations for what would happen afterward." "Is that so?" the Demon King of Incarceration said with a slow nod. While Balzac continued to speak, the Demon King was examining each of the souls in his possession. This careful examination was being done because he couldn't understand what Balzac's soul, which he had never personally sent to the abyss, was doing here. But now he understood it. He also understood why Balzac had decided to come to Babel just to die here. The man had used his death to trick the Demon King. Balzac had split his soul right at the moment when the Demon King of Incarceration was collecting Balzac's soul following his death. The split had been pulled off so elegantly that the Demon King of Incarceration hadn't even noticed it happening, and in the end, just like Balzac had intended, the split-off soul had been drained into the abyss like all of Babel's discarded souls were. "To think that you would be able to fool me like this," the Demon King said, shaking his head and giving a hollow laugh. "Deception is one of my few specialties," Balzac admitted humbly. Although he couldn't see Balzac's face, the Demon King of Incarceration could clearly imagine what kind of expression Balzac must be having right now. "Was your signature also part of your plans for today?" the Demon King of Incarceration asked suspiciously. "If I hadn't had gluttony, I wouldn't have been able to orchestrate this very moment," Balzac confirmed, not feeling the need to hide anything any longer. If Balzac's signature consumed a living creature, Balzac could take that creature's strength and memories for his own. But in that case, where did the soul go? Instead of disappearing, it would actually become a part of Balzac. That was how Balzac had secretly expanded the size of his soul. After his soul had grown large enough, Balzac had secretly divided himself into two so that the Demon King of Incarceration was only ever able to read one of their memories. In the end, Balzac's plan was successful. Until the moment of Balzac's death, the Demon King of Incarceration hadn't been able to sense his impending betrayal, nor had the Demon King noticed it when the deceased souls parted ways. "How impressive," the Demon King of Incarceration said as he nodded his head. "Balzac Ludbeth, I thought that you had given up on your wish. I even thought that your death was a meaningless one. However, it seems that wasn't the case. You continued to pursue your dream until the very end, and you also didn't die in vain. You even used your own death to transform yourself into a dagger that has stabbed me in the back. With just my death alone, Balzac responded, I wouldn't have been able to become a dagger capable of threatening you, Your Majesty. Balzac may have been smart, but that didn't mean he was capable of planning for everything. He had been unaware of the true nature of the Demon King of Incarceration. He had succeeded in secretly dividing his soul, and his split soul had managed to sneak all the way down into the abyss. But that didn't mean Balzac had the confidence that he would truly become a virulent poison capable of threatening the Demon King of Incarceration. Even after transforming himself into a deadly poison, if the Demon King of Incarceration had had a moment to spare, Balzac would definitely have been destroyed before he could position himself to be the dagger in the Demon King's back. The fact that I was able to become a dagger like this, it definitely means that you were distracted with something else, Your Majesty. Because of that, you were forced to draw on your deepest reserves of strength, Balzac surmised. The Demon King of Incarceration simply smiled warmly without responding. Right now, I have turned myself into a poison and am currently spreading throughout your abyss, Balzac declared proudly. However, I alone am still not enough to defeat you, Your Majesty. No matter how far I spread, you would still be able to excise me. However, by cutting me out of yourself like that, you would surely suffer a corresponding loss of strength. The sea below was churning. Even at this very moment, Balzac's soul was still growing larger by devouring the souls trapped within the abyss. The larger he grew, the faster the devouring process became. That is more than enough for me, Balzac said with a smile. In the end, this is all for the sake of ensuring Your Majesty's defeat, and protecting the current era rather than the next. Boom. A huge vibration seemed to shake the world they were in. The Demon King of Incarceration lifted his head to look upwards. The scene in his eyes suddenly changed. Instead of the abyss, the Demon King of Incarceration was now back to viewing reality. In reality, the Demon King of Incarceration had collapsed onto the floor. He wasn't dead yet. However, his regeneration had slowed and his mind was confused. His senses were still skewed. Meanwhile, his degree of poisoning kept escalating. The Demon King of Incarceration laughed without trying to get to his feet. How impressive, Balzac Ludbeth. The Demon King of Incarceration felt the need to acknowledge the wizard once more. Chuckling to himself, he placed a hand on the ground for support as he stood up. This is certainly a fatal blow. And it's not just you. Everyone present could currently prove a fatal threat to me. Eugene and Sienna had frozen at the sudden mention of Balzac's name. However, they didn't get the chance to ask why the Demon King had mentioned that name. Their eyes were drawn to the Demon King of Incarceration's shadow, which was visibly swelling up from the floor as the Demon King staggered to his feet. The Demon King of Incarceration proceeded to wrap his arms around his shoulders before slowly crouching down. What the hell? Eugene cursed nervously as he swung his divine sword. The long slash that flew from his blade sliced through the Demon King of Incarceration's neck. However, even when the Demon King's head fell to the ground, the warning from Eugene's intuition hadn't disappeared. Molin, who felt the same sense of danger, immediately gripped onto the fabric of space and pulled Eugene backward. Then, while leaping back himself, Molin swung his hand forward once more. Whoosh! As the fabric of space was forcefully pushed forward, the distance between the Demon King of Incarceration and the members of their party was widened. Sienna! Molin roared out. Sienna also lifted Mary without hesitation as she got ready to defend herself. At the same time, she used her other hand to grab the demon eye of fantasy that had been floating nearby. Noir tried to stop her. Hold on, I still have to. Sienna scolded her. You're just my tool, so don't go sacrificing yourself as you please. Sienna knew that Noir had prepared herself for self-destruction. Earlier, she had respected and understood Noir's determination, but now that things had changed, Sienna couldn't allow Noir to go through with her original plan. The rampaging poison had already begun to collapse the dream world. And whatever the Demon King of Incarceration was currently attempting, it didn't feel like something that could be avoided just by stubbornly maintaining this dream world. Why has he suddenly changed patterns? Eugene thought in concern. Was it because they had managed to push the Demon King to such an extent? Did it have something to do with how the Demon King had uttered the name Balzac Ludbeth? Incarceration had said that he had felt a fatal threat. It seemed that it was true that the Demon King of Incarceration had been pushed to the point where he was left with no other choice but to admit that honestly. However, the Demon King of Incarceration wasn't going to give up just yet. As his shadow continued to swell, all of his sinister dark power began to coalesce around the Demon King of Incarceration. Christina and Anissa's prayers conjured a dazzling light as a barrier rose up from the holy ground below, covering Eugene, Mullen, and Sienna. A spell was also shot out from Mary as Sienna ripped apart space to create a path of escape. Right at that moment, a river of darkness began to flow from the stump of the Demon King of Incarceration's severed neck. The poison endlessly pouring out from the abyss began to engulf the world around the Demon King. Since the need to maintain the dream world had ended with Sienna's withdrawal of the demon eye of fantasy, Eugene and Mullen could also now sense the effects of this poison. The poison and dark power continuously gushing forth from the Demon King's neck formed a huge wave that swept toward Eugene and his companions. Ha, ha. The sound of laughter rang out from this dark torrent of liquid. It was Balzac's laughter. The Demon King of Incarceration had managed to completely flush Balzac from his inner sea. This would guarantee Balzac's complete annihilation, but Balzac didn't care. With this, it should be possible for me to become a part of your legend, don't you think? Balzac's clear voice flowed into Sienna and Eugene's ears. At that moment, Eugene and Sienna understood what Balzac had intended to do with his death at their hands. Sienna gaped blankly for a few moments, then she let out a snort and shook her head. So much so that I even feel the urge to write a fairy tale just for you, Sienna said, her voice filled with sincerity. However, that was the last that would be heard of Balzac's voice. Balzac had already completely disappeared. He had left without any regrets. In his final moments, Balzac managed to achieve what he had always dreamed of, and he died satisfied. As the Black Wizard who had betrayed the Demon King, he was a legendary wizard who had contributed greatly to the Demon King's defeat. However, Balzac's wish hadn't been fully realized just yet. Ruhr, freewebnovel.com. The poison and dark power erupting from the Demon King of Incarceration was beginning to erode and collapse Babel itself. Before they could get caught up in this senseless destruction, Eugene and the others used the spatial door created by Sienna's magic to escape from Babel. After floating through space for a few moments, Eugene and his party arrived at the skies above the battlefield. Then they watched as Babel collapsed behind them,